Why I left Seventh-day Adventism? I think one of the major contributors to me leaving Adventism would be Christological errors, a lack of continuity in history, um, and also some of the presuppositions of the pioneers. I'll start with Christology. So, one issue is Nestorianism, and eventually leading to anti-Trinitarianism in Ellen G. White's writings. But one of the things is the idea of soul death or soul sleep, that there is a lack of consciousness outside of natural existence, right? Like being alive, right? So there's no consciousness. There's no consciousness after death. Leads to Nestorianism and Christology. For example, what happened to Jesus during the 3 days in the tomb? In an Adventist presupposition, you have to affirm that Jesus truly dies, which means the human nature of Christ ceases to be. If this is the case, that means you separated the divinity and humanity of Christ, having one nature cease to be, right? Cease to be conscious, cease existence for those 3 days, and dividing the humanity and divinity of Christ. That's very problematic. It's Nestorianism, that there's two persons, two subjects in the Trinity. Sorry, in the incarnation. So that's very problematic for the theology. Another issue would be Arianism in Ellen G. White, because she believes that the texts that talk about Christ, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" or being forsaken by the Father, was literally being eternally separated from the Father, which is Arianism, right? I mean, there's one will in the Trinity. You cannot have one person of the Trinity damning or rejecting or forsaking the other. So a faulty misinterpretation that leads to Arianism. Another issue would be account for the biblical text. This is more of like a Protestant-wide critique. You cannot account for the biblical text. You cannot account for the biblical text without appealing to the church tradition and recognizing some kind of authority. Protestants may say we can accept the authority, it's just not infallible. However, they're so bootstrapped to the authority of the church that it is binding almost in the same sense as Scripture. The Westminster Confession of Faith talks about how God is the Lord of the conscience, and He's let it free to the doctrines of commandments of men. And it talks about how we have liberty of conscience in the doctrines of commandments of men. This is not the case with the decision on Canon. Protestants are so bootstrapped to this tradition. For example, Protestants will say that there's criteria for canonicity, apostolic witness, or authority. I mean, how we know something is apostolic is from the church. How we know like widespread orthodoxy is another criteria for canonicity. Well, this is widespread orthodoxy. Quote orthodoxy, I mean the normative body that decides orthodoxy is the early church. They're bootstrapped to that one. Widespread acceptance, I mean, I don't know if that's really a good justification or criteria for canon, because I mean, just because it's widespread doesn't mean it's true. But I mean, all those criterion for determining what is canon is bootstrapped to the early church witness, such that they would not have intelligibility of Scripture without the early church. And I see that as an inconsistent position in Protestantism, because you are so bootstrapped to the early church such that it's binding to the point where you lose a liberty of conscience. I mean, you cannot doubt that the early church witness of apostolicity, like delivering the apostolic texts, in determining and deciding, I guess, or concluding what are the canonical texts. To doubt that is to doubt the apostolicity of the text itself, and is completely self-defeating. I mean, if we can start doubting the criterion of the canon, then we can doubt the canon completely. We can just deny that it's from God. I mean, it's such a decimating point to Protestantism. And it's also not consistent because if God is the Lord of conscience, the Lord of the conscience, as the Westminster Confession of Faith says, and we are so epistemically bound to the early church witness such that we don't have a liberty of conscience when it comes to the canon. This is the way we know something is scripture, is through the early church. Is inconsistent because only the scripture is supposed to be able to have that ability, yet the church ends up having this kind of authority and ability to bind the conscience. Another thing is the pioneers were Arian. They didn't believe Christ was God. They believed he was the first creature of the Father, like Arius, like Charles Taze Russell and other Arians at the time. So the roots of Adventism and the logical conclusions, at least in Ellen G. White's writing, and some of the presuppositions like soul sleep actually kind of lead to Arianism. So to be consistent in Adventism is to be an Arian. That's why there's these cultists trying to push the notion that Adventism has apostatized because it has accepted the Trinity, and they should go back to their roots, which is Arianism. So those things like that, such a fundamental understanding to our faith, which is Christology and the Trinity. When you remove the Trinity from Christianity, you're not Christian, right? So you're of a different religion if you don't affirm the Trinity, and that's detrimental. So in conclusion, Sola Scriptura is self-defeating and intelligible to hold. It's inconsistent. It ends up leading to circular reasoning when accounting for the biblical text, or it's just inconsistent and so epistemically bootstrapped to the early church's witness that it's almost not proper and not very consistent in the epistemology of Protestants. And also the Arian leadings of Adventism and the writings of Ellen G. White bring problems on your Christology and Trinitarian theology. I mean, even Jerry Moon says that the Trinity model that Ellen G. White later comes out with, the heavenly trio, is not the same doctrine that was rejected by the pioneers, which the pioneers rejected creedal Trinitarianism. So even the invention of Ellen G. White is not the Trinity. Especially, there's even metaphysical presuppositions, such as the idea of person in Adventism is completely different to the early church's understanding. These are revealed categories, like the idea of personhood, the idea of essence is a revealed category, and you need the early church. You cannot just Bible alone, because that's really the mindset of the pioneers. It's just no creed but the Bible, which is not Sola Scriptura. It's Sola Scriptura, which is even worse. But even both of those positions fail to account for the biblical text. So it doesn't matter if you're Sola Scriptura, Sola Scriptura. It reduces down to the same critique. So yeah, that would be some of the main reasons why I left Seventh-day Adventism.